Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso, and we just wrapped up our interview with Chad Faso. So, guys, we are excited to introduce you to him. Anthony, what's a takeaway or two that you had?
I would say, what was very interesting. I think that this is a unique podcast in many ways. I think and what it is over the last 15 years, I mean, it's rare that we have a podcast with two people that I have mentored with infinite banking for 15 years on the same podcast. So to me, it's like that, that That's teacher, good. That wise That's one, good. Like the kids, the students, are together. So that was super cool. But in all seriousness, we're, introducing my son. So honestly, part of it was a little awkward because I'm part of the subject matter and I didn't want to ask a question. It felt a little weird if I'm asking a question that I was already part of the story. But honestly, I mean, there was part of it, it was a little emotional. It was kind of cool when you see your kid like starting to blossom and follow in their path. And it's great that our paths have merged. But, one of the things that, one of the takeaways that Chad had shared is that I would tell you I was looking forward to when he graduated. I was going to buy him a watch, and I was going to give him the book, and that did happen. And we even captured that in a photo, which hopefully we were put in the YouTube video. But, I would tell you, I was expecting like, oh, Dad, you did this for me. Oh, how do let me dive into this and take it over. But you know what? He wasn't ready. Right. So part of that as a father was like, oh, man, you're not following my plan of what I thought this was all going to happen. But I had to show restraint and let him figure it out himself. And he attempted that, and he tried a few things. And when it didn't work, he had to try it out for himself before he was ready. So I wanted to share that, because if you're a parent and when you transition these policies to your kids, it's possible they may not be ready, and you need to have that patience, but remember, during this whole time, I owned and controlled that policy. Mm-hmm. Right. So I wasn't about to give it to him until he was ready, because as he even said in there, if I had given it to him, he would have gotten a boat. Right. So, Cam, what was some of your takeaways?
Yeah, there's just a few takeaways in there. Great interview. And what I would say is this is kind of a 2-for-1, right? We've had some interviews with clients and asked them about their experience, and Chad's got a unique one because he was talking about how he was introduced to infinite banking, and which is a really interesting story. And I think it's a great listen for parents, like Anthony was talking about. But also in the second level is that, man, he's one of our new coaches. Mm-hmm. Right. And so, he's in a role, he understands infinite banking. He's been around it forever. He's been in the office for a better part of a year now. And so, I think he's going to be a great asset to our clients and you guys. And so I'm excited to introduce him to everybody. And then the last thing that I kind of heard there him say was, I asked him about why he was passionate about infinite banking. And this is a common theme that you'll hear when you talk to people that have been exposed to infinite banking or passionate about it, is that, man, when you understand it and you realize how impactful it can be on your life, is you almost share to have an obligation, right? Is man, you hear that, you want other people to have what you have. And so infinite banking, or that piece to it, is going to be a really good thread for Chad moving forward. So again, we're excited to introduce you guys to Chad Faso. He'll be hanging around a little bit more. We're going to have him back on future episodes as well.
Enjoy the episode.
Take care. If you're an investor or want to be an investor and you're looking to create passive income that exceeds your monthly expenses, then this is the podcast for you. Here on the Infinite Wealth Podcast, we combine the philosophies of Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad, along with Nelson Nash's infinite banking concept. Welcome to the Infinite Wealth Podcast. I'm Cameron Christensen, along with our co-host Anthony Faso. And we are excited today because, to be honest, this interview is long overdue. Today, we're going to be introducing you to one of our coaches, Chad Faso. Chad, welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, gentlemen. It's nice to be here.
Chad, we're excited to have you here, man. Let's get this thing started and tell us a little bit about yourself.
So I'm Chad. Been with Infinite Wealth for probably about a year now, and born and raised in Las Vegas. There's not too many of us that were born here. So Las Vegan, and
Mhm.
I've been married to my wife Chelsea for about 5 years. We've been together for about 8. Got 2 beautiful little boys. Vance is 3. Shane's about 6 months old, and grew up here playing sports and having fun. Um, Professionally, I've been a respiratory therapist for past 6 years. For those that don't know, a respiratory therapist works in the hospital, and we deal with life support, so patients on ventilators and things like that.
You working with
And
adults or kids or?
I started with adults and then
Mhm.
transitioned to working with kids.
Tell me a little bit about how this last year's been for you, right? How's it been kind of working in the office and hanging around the old man here?
I gotta say, man, being in the office is wonderful. Like you guys, the amount of light and joy around the office and hairstyle and products is out of
Yeah,
control
right.
between the two of you guys. It's
Hey,
outrageous.
man, you got priorities. We got to build a culture somehow, right? Yeah.
That's part of
Oh
the
yeah.
culture that we look at as fitting in is like, how's your hair?
Or
How
beard.
how well
Chad, you
styled
got,
you are.
yeah,
I
yeah.
did get a compliment today, Cameron, that my hair is better. And I
Oh,
just want to
man.
throw it out
Tell,
there. I
if
mean,
it's from Chelsea, it doesn't count. She's obligated to throw that around. Yeah. Yeah.
It was not Chelsea. I was there to confirm, and I'm like, maybe you're right, but just I kind of I should have told you don't tell Cameron because now
Man.
the questions he's going to ask you are going to be
he's gonna
gotcha
need to know
questions.
who. No.
Yeah,
Awesome, man. So you've been hanging around the office, enjoying it. Tell listeners a little about kind of the RT profession, right? Is I really don't have a clue kind of what that entails. Maybe give us an overview and then some of the challenges that you saw in that industry.
Okay. A lot of what we do is centered around obviously breathing diseases. So there's COPD. We got all of our smokers. That's the job security, and then we deal with asthmatics and things like that, as well as multiple other things. But mainly, we see the critical patients, and we're there. We have a little bit different role than like a nurse because we only come in when somebody does need actual help breathing, which is always an urgent situation. So
Yeah.
we deal with assisting with all the intubations and putting patients on ventilators, setting their settings, and working with the pulmonologist to get them the best care that we can and off the ventilator as fast as we can. Try to keep that time down to a minimum.
that sounds like an emotional taxing on you. How has that been emotionally?
Honestly, it's kind of rough. I remember at the beginning, so I started maybe the first couple of years just working with adults, and at first that was rough. And then you start to slowly get a little desensitized to it when you start to see things on a more regular basis. Um, and then the last maybe 3 years, I've been working with kids, and now that I have kids of my own,
Mhm.
it's getting to a point where it's too hard to see.
Mm.
Obviously, someone has to be there to help children, and that's kind of how I try to frame it in my head for a long time: is that someone has to be there to help them. Um, but yeah, just became unhealthy.
Awesome, man. Uh, Chad, I would like to kind of talk about IBC, but even before that, I've known you over the years for quite a while, right? And I've known kind of your pursuit for financial gain. Maybe you can share with our listeners a little bit about some of the financial investments that you've made over the years, a little bit about your background in investing.
Okay. So I think I've always had that drive there to go out and seek like the hunger. Always
Mhm.
wanted nice things, right? Like who
Yeah.
doesn't want nice things or, um, obviously money isn't everything, but it's a great tool to get you things that could make life a whole lot easier. One of the first things I kind of started with is cryptocurrency. I ended up teaching myself how to build these mining rigs, and I ended up building a handful of computers that were out there mining. It was Ethereum at the time. Um, and they ended up starting to produce a lot of money. I think I had three machines going, and each one was pulling in like $500 a month. Um,
Mhm.
and that was something I was doing while I was in school, and ended up being extremely beneficial. After that, we kind of started, I graduated, and then I started having a little bit more money. And then we started looking into land flipping, and we did land flipping for a good amount, maybe 3 or 4 years. And we started to build up some nice notes. And that was a really cool process. For those that don't know, I'm Chad Faso. I'm Anthony's son, so CPA's son. So we did it as a business, family business. So it was me, my dad, my sister, and my mom. I did all the sales part. Uh, Sarah did marketing, and my mother, love her, she did all the title work. And that was a really cool experience to get to. It's one thing working with like random people, right? But you start to work with family, and that was really cool. See how everybody meshed together, and some of the challenges that come along with that as well. Um, After the land business, I started moving into. Um, Always had this urge. Well, obviously the urge to make money, but I wanted to not my wife does work as well, and I wanted to provide her the option if she wanted it to stop working. So that's another factor to the hunger. So the hunger is already there, right? And then you just keep
Mhm.
growing and growing, and you're like, man, what can I do to do more? um, so after the land business, I got into flipping houses. So I went in and found a nice hard money lender that had okay terms, and found a wholesaler, purchased a house with hard money, put 20% down, and I had the funds myself to do all the renovations, and we went through that process. Um, that was an interesting one because the market, um, it was right at the end of coronavirus. So when the market switched and the rates shot up, house prices came down. So I ended up having to hold that for a little while, and actually just put it on the market today.
Hmm.
Nice, man. Congrats.
Yeah.
Awesome. So Chad, right? So what I'm hearing is kind of this pursuit for financial freedom, right? Create income somehow. You've had a bunch of different ventures, which is great. Um, a lot of our listeners have used infinite banking to kind of reach that goal. Do you remember when you were first introduced to infinite banking?
So I was trying to look back on when I was first introduced to this. I mean, for those that don't know, Nelson Nash has unfortunately passed away. But I do remember actually meeting Nelson Nash with my dad, and I think that is wild. So I
Yeah.
think when I was first introduced, I was probably a teenager.
Mhm.
Um, Yeah, I was a teenager, and I remember he gave me the book. So there was a multitude of books I've had to read over the years because he's focused on self-development and teaching, and honestly, even with kids, like all these kids don't have any financial background, right? Like they don't teach that stuff in school. So I was blessed enough to have a CPA for a dad. So I got to read The Richest Man in Babylon. I
Mhm.
got to read Rich Dad Poor Dad, and I wish I would have finished IBC back then, but I think there's some, you're not focused on that when you're a teenager.
Yeah.
You're focused on who's got a fast car, who are we playing in lacrosse this weekend,
Mhm.
what girls are we talking to? We're gonna play some video games, and doing things like that. So when I was first introduced, I was not as interested as I should be. You know, you just don't care at that point. You don't have enough life experience to know that you're like, oh man, I just got handed gold. But you're like, what do I do with this gold bar? You're 15. No one knows. Yeah.
That's a good analogy.
Yeah.
Because because what Chad, I think what is unique about your experience is that, like with Cameron and I, we started doing infinite banking as like when we were seasons, like we were in our 30s. Or Cameron, you might have been in your 20s.
I was in my 20s.
That's
Yeah.
my 20s. But we got exposed to it ourselves, like as adult. But you got exposed to it when you were a teenager, and I think it's common that we, as parents, provide these assets or these tools, and it's common that our children may not understand the value of it at the time, but eventually you did, Chad. So what made the switch?
One of the biggest things, and my dad had always told me that when I was ready, that the policy would be mine.
Mm-hmm.
I can tell you that I remember being in school and when we did some of those crypto mining rigs, I think one of the machines I didn't have enough money for. I was like, man, I would love to do more. I'd build a million of these things if I could, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't have the funds to do it. And I remember we went through the process and didn't realize I was utilizing the policy, but I ended up getting a loan from him that was still under his control, and then it was given to me, and I used that loan to build the mining rig. And then what did I do? I used the profits from the mining rig to pay back the loan. So in a roundabout way, I was infinite banking before I even knew I was infinite banking, which is wild. And then it turned into I'll touch on the house flip. So
Yeah.
we do this flip. I had the cash from the hard money loan and I had the cash to do all of the fixing. But what people don't tell you is that hard money loans and their rates are kind of terrible. It's like no one tells you this until you have to figure it out. But you're like, oh, 12%. You're like, oh, yeah, I can carry that for a little while. But then when the house wasn't selling, and I was like, oh, man, I'm going to have to figure something out because this is not, I can't keep going this way. I ended up having to refinance the house. And when I did that, I think I needed an extra 20,000 that I didn't have on hand. But luckily, I had that inside of my policy. So I was able to take a policy loan to get the refinance done. And the beautiful thing about that loan is I haven't paid it back yet because I still have the house. So the terms are so flexible that I can just pay the money back when I have it. It was kind of a big mind shift between like your typical thought, right? You're like, oh man, I'm getting a loan. This is terrible. I'm gonna have to do this, but I can tell you nobody's gonna come knocking on my door saying, hey, where's my money? Because it's fully collateralized by my life.
Chad, you mentioned kind of a couple of things there, and one of them was kind of realizing you're doing banking before you knew it, and then we were kind of asking about kind of that process of education. When did you start to realize how important banking was, or how valuable this gold bar that you had was?
I think part of it, like even throwing back to 15, like you don't have that life experience to like really value what money is, right? Like you don't maybe appreciate it as much as you should, which is kind of sad. There's like that feeling of entitlement or all of that. And I think even when I had graduated college, I think I had the potential to learn more about IBC, but I still wasn't ready. I ended up, you have to go through some, I'm one of those like you got to fall on your face, get back up, and then keep going. Um, and I think I had to learn the lesson. So I mean, besides those investments, I had done some stocks, was doing some day trading, some option trading, and for a while I was killing it. Like I was doubling my money, even with crypto trades. I was doing very good, and then um, got into a couple option trades that just did not work out, and then you lose your money, and you're like, whoa. You're like,
Well, this isn't as
you
fun.
just lost 50%, 70%. It's like boom, just like that. So as easy as it comes, it goes just as easily. And I remember during my education process with my dad, he was teaching me about the policy. He made me go through the whole process that all of our clients go through. you look back on that hierarchy of wealth, and it talks about having that firm foundation, right? You start with like core assets, and then you move up into maybe a little bit more risky, but not unsafe assets where you still have liquidity. And then you build upon that. And I actually started at the top tier. You know, um, part of it, I think, is like one of those things where it's like someone tells you not to do something, and you're like, oh, now I want to do it. But I was always being told, you have to go do banking, or you have to read this book, or you have to do this. And I think it made me want to do the opposite. And so if you're not taking advice from family, you're going to start looking for it elsewhere. So you start looking up, you're like, oh, I'm trying to hit home runs. I'm trying to get rich quick. I'm going to do this, and it's all going to work out, and I'm going to be super rich. And then you fall on your face a little bit because you didn't build the firm foundation. And I think that's when I leaned back into IBC.
Awesome, man. What was that first step? Did when you started leaning back into IBC, right? Did your dad say, "Hey, here's the policy," or was there any sort of qualifications there?
So I finished, had to read the book. So finish becoming your own banker. I think I've read the first 20 pages maybe 15 times. So before it took me a minute to get through it. So once I finally finished that, then we set up some meetings and we went through the policy just like every client does. And the next step was to start actually funding it. So once the policy was signed over to me, I started funding this policy and putting money into it.
Awesome, man. When you started taking that over, like what the thought that I had, and maybe you can speak to this, is that man, you know what? My parents didn't do that for me, right? So to be honest, kind of looking back, is there I don't know, is there a sentiment or a feeling that you have on like, man, you know what? I had this thing that was handed to me. It was great, but I didn't quite know what it was. Is there anything there?
Yeah, I think at first there's like some kind of confusion, right? You're like, what is this? Like, what are you trying to give me? Or you look at it and you're like, are those, you're like, wait, I have loans? You're like, I thought you helped me pay for school, right? You're like, oh man, I thought school was paid for. But it was paid for, but in a roundabout way, it was kind of paid for me because now I have the ability to put all this money back inside of my policy that I never would have had the chance to do. I can tell you now the feeling that I have is going to be gratitude. Like I was handed this extremely useful tool. I got to skip the slow start, and now I put $1 inside my policy, and it grows by $2.15. I can tell you that there's no bank account out there where you put in $1 and it grows by more than $1. That's wild, and that's the power of IBC, which I now see.
Now, Chad, what would you say? Because I'm sure there's a lot of parents that are listening that are debating with the best way to save for their children's future. What advice would you give to them?
Man, now that I know so much more about this, for one, I'm not tied to the market. I'm sure some of the listeners have heard that, like, right as I was about to go to school, I lost a big majority of my college fund. It was just whoop. So, for one, not tied to the market. You got guaranteed growth. Um, Two, you're not handing them something like what is it, the 529 plans, something where you're tied to a market where the only thing you can transfer it over to is like a 401 or a Roth. You're handing them something that they can actually use. Like this is like the Swiss Army knife of bank accounts, right? Like, oh, you want to take a loan? Cool. You don't want to know what your terms are? Whatever you want them to be. I mean, and your money is still growing at the same time. Like I don't know if it really gets much better. Um, the other thing is honestly, it does take a little education. Like if you want your kid to do this and you want them to be truly financially free and able to access the money and use it, I don't think there is a better tool. I think you should use IBC.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I think that like you'd mentioned there is that access can be a double-edged sword, right? So if you give somebody access to money without any sort of education, more than likely, right, they're going to blow it, they'll lose it, whatever they do. And I think that's what I can appreciate with what your dad was doing, was giving you that education first, right? Reading these books, trying to plant that seed. And so I think that is the kind of the message to most parents out there, is you got to lead with education, and then maybe give your kids a chance to kind of make a mistake, right? With some smaller dollar amounts along the way, because
Yeah.
kids will make a mistake. But man, once they get that foundation, once they prove to you that they're, of sound mind and good judgment, then man, that's a great opportunity to start considering handing that policy over. So, man, I like that trajectory that you were on there, Chad.
Yeah, I can tell you, if you would have handed 18-year-old Chad a fully paid IBC policy, I would have had a boat. And I don't even know how to drive a boat, but I would have had one.
Figure it out.
One thing I think is interesting is we should do more than just save for their education. We need to give them the tools to obtain that education, but also learn how to use it going forward. Oftentimes if we fund a 529 plan, or interesting thing is, I spoke with a person the other day, how he wanted to give their child has just finished school, graduated college. They wanted to give them a gift, and so they were going to fund an account with their typical financial advisor. Which sounds nice and noble. I respect what they're doing. However, what are their kids learning? What they're learning is trusting others with their money. And as you guys, if you haven't learned, you will learn. Nobody cares more about your money than yourself. And the only time I've lost money is when I've given up control of it. And so we need to not only pay for their future, but we need to teach them how to continue to pay for the remainder amount of their future. Future is much bigger than just education.
Yeah, well said. Chad, man, we're excited to be bringing on as a coach. Maybe give us some reasons. Why are you excited to be a coach?
Man, there's a number. I mean, for one, hospital, way too taxing on my soul. It's not good for my heart. It's not good for family life. Um, Number two is, in all reality, it's always been an option, right? Like, I've always known about IBC. I just didn't realize that I could actually share it with people. Like, I didn't realize it was an option to like teach people how to do infinite banking. Um, the third is, I've seen what it can do for my family. I mean, I remember growing up, not to knock all CPAs, but during tax season, they're not around. Like, don't get me wrong, like we did have family time on the off season, but during tax season, I didn't see them. I mean, they were 60, 70-hour weeks, I'd imagine. You probably can't grasp that as a teenager, but I remember he just wasn't home. He had to work. And now, I mean, things are so much different. I mean, well, now I have a child of my own. The dude's there for my kid. I mean, like everything the man's around, right? Like if he needs to get to like a family event, he's there. There's no missing it. I mean, we get to go on family vacations now. Um, and I think you see stuff like that. And honestly, I want to model my life off of it, right? Like I want my family to have the same experience. I don't want it to be like, oh man, dad has to work 5 12s in a row at the hospital so that we can live the lifestyle we want. I want to be able to be there for my family at all times.
Awesome, man. That's pretty cool, Anthony, right? To have your son look up to you and want to model your life after it. That's pretty awesome. Awesome. Well, Chad, man, we really appreciate you coming on. Love the kind of background that you've been able to give, and we're excited for you to kind of share your insight on infinite banking with our listeners. And so, man, we're excited to get this one out there and introduce you to our client base.
Well, thank you guys. I appreciate you guys having me on.
Pleasure has completely been mine. So I appreciate it. Thanks, Chad. I'm really looking forward to how you can take the experience that you have from being minimally exposed to infinite banking around as a teenager and kind of being around that. And I think that that will help you be a better coach because you have a better understanding than other IBC guys and girls around there. So looking forward to you to continue to help our clients. Go make it a fantastic day.
Take care.
If you like this video, I know you're like this one. And if you want to learn how investors use infinite banking to increase their returns and lower their taxes, check this out. And if you have some questions and want to see if infinite banking is for you, hop on a discovery call with us. Link for that will be in the description.